Welcome to Talking Absolute Worship, where we have reached the last week of Lent and the beginning of Holy Week, often marked by Palm Sunday. And many churches mark Palm Sunday, some churches mark Passion Sunday. We've had to make a choice and we've decided to go with Palm Sunday, though we may also talk about Passion Sunday for those of you who are looking for a way into this year. So to start us off, Lithan, how are you thinking about Palm Sunday for this year?
Well, I wouldn't is the start, because I would always put the two together, but we'll talk about that a bit later, about why I think it's important to have Palm and Passion put together. But if we're just trying to talk about the readings for Palm Sunday, looking at John, and it's striking that there's very few, four verses to describe the whole of this, whereas so many of the other Gospels go into great lengths to describe getting the donkey or the two donkeys, depending on where you are. And John just goes, Jesus found a young donkey. So, because it's such a lovely story, isn't it? That one of how Jesus must have prepared and what village and what they were to say and how that worked out. No, he just found a donkey in John. But where would I go with this is I might think about what did it feel to be in the crowd, and Spill the Beans, which is a really good lectionary resource, almost as good as this one, that comes out as a PDF once a quarter. Say, what would it be like to be in the crowds? And particularly thinking about what life's like now, where to be in a crowd, we feel quite unsafe because we've got so used to go, keep away, 2 meters apart, crowds are bad, wear a mask. What would it have been like? How would we feel in a crowd? And would it have felt any different to be in a crowd then? Not that there was a virus, but how safe would it be to be in a crowd at that time as well? So with Roman soldiers watching, with the chief priests and scribes there who might think that you'd be doing things that you shouldn't, and that would get reported back, and the whole not feeling very stable political situation. And then Jesus comes, and if you knew Jesus was coming, how would you expect him to be, and what was he like, and how would that be? So there's a whole angle of how does it feel to be the crowd, and then also what does Jesus think he's doing with this? How much has he planned and prepared? Why does he think this is the right statement to make, knowing that it's going to be really unpopular? So last week Rachel said something brilliant about in John, there's a whole lot of the hour has not come. And then suddenly last week we kind of got him going, the hour has come. And then he does this thing that's guaranteed to set people off. And because of all of the scriptural stuff. So in John it does say it's to fulfill the scripture, really, as it's written, don't be afraid, daughter of Zion, your king is coming sitting on a donkey's calf. So he's already plugging into that, going, I am the king, which will upset the chief priests and scribes, because it will upset those who expect a king to come as a warrior, and it will upset the Romans because there's not supposed to be any king that they can't manipulate. So why does Jesus do this in this way? And there are all sorts of things you can say about why does he do this, and probably, from John's perspective, it does look like it is just, this is who I am. And John, we've already had the cleansing of the temple with John. He does that much earlier, or John puts it much earlier. You can decide with biblical criticism what you want to do, but he takes that, let's really upset the religious leaders out from that. Their upset is all about what's happening when Jesus enters Jerusalem and makes that statement. And then I always try and work out, so what does this mean for me? And I suppose that's my struggle with looking at Palm Sunday on its own, is I can go and I'd be someone going, yay, it's Jesus, and loving him for who I am and shouting the hosannas. But we all know there's more to the story than that. But I'll leave it there and we'll come back to other things later on.
Thank you. Great start. You reminded me a little bit when you started talking of something I'm fairly sure I've read it about 20 years ago, maybe more, in the old magazine series called the Expository Times. And who remembers that? Those green things. I don't know if it's still going, the Expository Times, but they used to have sample sermons, didn't they, for the coming months. I used to subscribe to the I think I said Suppository Times, isn't it? It will forever be known now. And I'm fairly sure it was in there that somebody wrote a sermon that powerfully affected the way I've almost always preached on Palm Sunday, and that was to take this idea of the crowds, and what they did was they kind of superimposed onto the story a kind of a tourist map of Jerusalem, and followed the journey, obviously thinking of other Gospels as well, or thinking that John had moved the cleansing of the temple, and it really happened in this week. Followed the procession from the gate to the temple, and describes going past the Antonia barracks, where the soldiers would have been nervously stationed, and the sermon just did it so well. Described the young conscript soldiers have been drafted in, expecting trouble, hoping there wouldn't be any, hoping they wouldn't have to go out and get involved in violence in a city that they had no real part of, but had been conscripted, and holding their spears with their knuckles going white as this procession gets closer. And as the procession gets closer, it gets smaller. And you saying the stuff about how did it feel to be in the crowd always makes me think of that crowd getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as this journey continues until they get to the temple. And in one of the Gospels it says the children were singing, because they're the only ones left who they think won't get arrested. It's the children, a bit like you see children throwing stones in the Israel-Palestine conflict because they assume the children won't get attacked. Well, I suppose that's no longer the assumption. But back then, this procession had dwindled because of the growing seriousness of what they thought they were involved with. So I think that's a powerful perspective to take. Yes, Ruth.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And yes, thank you, Lithan. It's I think that the danger of Palm Sunday is that we know the story, so we retell the story, and we kind of forget the context of then and forget the context of now. So I like your idea of thinking, what does it feel like to be in a crowd now, and what did it feel like to be in a crowd then, and how do all those events land for us and for them? So yeah, I think there's a lot to be done there, which that isn't the way that I'd gone just yet, but I think I would add some of that in, definitely.
Rachel.
The other thing about crowds is that we've got stories in other places of Jesus knowing exactly what's going on with this sort of smallest individual person in a crowd. So you've got the woman who comes to him and tries to just secretly touch his coat, and you've got Zacchaeus, who Jesus sees from within the crowd. You've got Jesus sort of knowing and seeing the individual. Thinking about how it felt to be in that crowd, particularly knowing, perhaps if you knew that Jesus had got form on, picking out people, do you want to be noticed? Do you not want to be noticed? Yeah, that's quite interesting. I like that.
I think that's an interesting perspective about Jesus and crowds. He knew about crowds. He knew how they worked, didn't he? And the dynamics of crowds and how to interact with them. I had a quick look this week at Marcus Borg and Dominic Crossan the last week, because they have a very particular understanding of how what this crowd was about and why Jesus did that and why Jesus went through that gate at that particular time. And I think I looked at Borg and Crossan last year or the year before, and wrote some stuff about some little monologues of people who were involved, which might be a way to go with telling this story. I know one of them was Barabbas and one of them was the donkey seller, but we can't use the donkey seller this year because it's John. And one of them was Simon the Zealot, describing how he had gone about the crowd as one of those whipper-uppers, and he'd assembled some of his friends to go around giving out palms or telling people what to shout, what the slogans were, because these demonstrations that you see and the crowds that we see are orchestrated. They're not all, they don't just happen out of nowhere. Slogans appear and placards appear and stuff appears, and so there's no evidence for this in John or Mark or Matthew or Luke that they went as provocateurs in this crowd, but it kind of makes sense and fits in with what Crossan and Marcus Borg see as a very deliberate counter-protest that Jesus had deliberately organized in order to counter the imperial procession that was perhaps coming in from the other end of the city, with Pilate at the head of the army, and that this was a counter-protest, and we're used to protests and counter-protests nowadays, aren't we, in a very organized way. So I think there's an awful lot of mileage in the idea of thinking about this crowd and what it was for and why it was assembled and what Jesus was up to. So thank you for that, Lithan. And I understand you've got more to say about passion, which I think will take us further than maybe Crossan and Borg go with this story, which I think will be a good thing to hear. Rachel, where were you going with these readings?
Well, I'd like to extend the John reading just by a few verses, really, because I don't like it when things cut off in the middle of a paragraph. I would like to get to the end. And so I'd like to go on to the end of verse 19, which is where the paragraph ends in my Bible. And what struck me reading about it this time is how the passage about Jesus entering Jerusalem is kind of sandwiched between mention of Lazarus. He's mentioned just before, and he's mentioned just in those few verses that I've added on. And so that made me think, obviously with Lazarus, we think about him dying and then being called back to life by Jesus, and the contrast between Lazarus's journey from death to life and Jesus's journey here, which we know with hindsight is a journey from life into death and then back out to life again. But that I kind of noted that contrast, which you do get in a couple of hymns around Palm Sunday, but generally I don't like Palm Sunday because you have this, churches like to make it a jamboree, don't they? It's so, ooh, let's all, let's prance around and wave our arms about with our little palm crosses, and let's all, shout and imagine we're in this wonderful procession. And I'm always thinking, yeah, but I know what's coming. I know what's coming, which is, I think, what Lithan's going to talk a bit more about later. This just struck me as yet another one of Jesus's provocative actions, and I said for last week, Jesus just being who Jesus was a massive, look, right, come and get me kind of thing. You're either going to like me or you're going to hate me. And just that whole conflict that arises when we face Jesus. And I felt like this is just another one of those instances where Jesus is saying, here I am. What are you going to do with me, kind of thing. It also struck me that we're so used to having quite a short thing. You've got Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and then you quickly move to the events of his arrest and crucifixion. But here you've got another 6 chapters before Jesus even gets arrested. So John is obviously, using it as a great as a great sort of teaching opportunity, and to maybe think about the significance of that. I'm all over the place because I really find Palm Sunday quite difficult, and I only had chance to really reflect on that last Lent, because I realised when we went into lockdown and kind of a lot of the Easter stuff didn't happen, I felt really relieved. And then I noted that for the previous few years, I've either managed to be on holiday during Holy Week, and I've just come back in time for Easter Sunday, or I was on sabbatical. So I've kind of neatly avoided Palm Sunday and Holy Week for quite a number of years. And I wondered what was going on in me to make me want to do that. And I realized that part of it was about sort of personal emotion, I think, that particularly I had a period of time where I felt that the kind of leadership I was offering a church wasn't the kind of leadership they were looking for, and I wasn't quite what they wanted, and so even though I was sort of saying what I felt was what God wanted us all to hear, it was always kind of blocked. And I was sort of told, well, I'm not a good leader, I'm a rubbish leader. And so I think a whole lot of my stuff about Palm Sunday and Holy Week was really tied up in that rejection, those feelings of rejection. And how can I convey anything of the sense that Jesus wasn't what people expected and wanted, and it all moves very quickly into into violence. How can I convey any of that when I feel really on the brink of not being able to talk about it? So I do really struggle with the whole jollity that sometimes churches want to put onto this Sunday.
Yeah, Ruth.
Well, thank you for that, Rachel. I mean, what struck me as you said it was, you said a leadership that wasn't what people wanted, which seems to be exactly what we've said and what John says about Jesus. So I think it feels as though you've got something really important to say about Palm Sunday, and thank you for pointing out that, yeah, as we're sticking with John, that John doesn't rush. I mean, I've long felt in ministry that a week is too short. Holy month would have been better, or holy 6 months might work even better. Because it is that for all of us in leadership of trying to work out, how do you do Palm Sunday and Maundy Thursday and Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and it's all in a week, and there's a lot to prepare. But John says, right, you need to understand this bit. Now you need to take some time out to really think and really get to grips with all of this teaching before you're ready to hear about the arrest and the crucifixion and the resurrection. So I think John and you are saying the same thing, which is, let's not rush here, and let's not get the emotional pull of the crowd so strongly that we want to be, yes, singing and dancing. And maybe it helps to remember that Hosanna means save us. And I say that to remind myself, because it's Hosanna's what you say on Palm Sunday, and it's a hooray thing. No, save us. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's something here about, if we cried out save us on Palm Sunday, save us from what? And you seem to be saying save us from being sucked along by the crowd into a jamboree. And I think we've all said it in different ways.
I think that's a very powerful thing to say. I was kind of struck by the way both Rachel and Lithan, with slightly different words, said, this is Jesus saying, here I am, what do you want to do with me? And I think Lithan put it something like John saying, this is just who Jesus is, that's why he did it, it's just who he is. And Rachel said, here I am, this is me. Deal with it, respond to this. This is what I'm offering. Take it or leave it. It's maybe a theme that we looked at a little bit last week, wasn't it? Thinking about Jesus offering that moment of crisis and choice in people's lives, where he says, "Here I am." And I very much chime with trying to squash it all into Holy Week. We just, I hesitate to say wasted. 6 weeks doing Lent, where we think, what are we going to do for another week of Lent? And then suddenly we have to do all of these things in 1 week of Holy Week, which I'm sure I'm not the only one who comes out at the end of it feeling utterly wringed out, and perhaps without the resources to celebrate Easter Day with as much joie de vivre as you think you might, because Easter Day is at the end of a very long traumatic week. I just think that's really honest and brave of you, Rachel, to lay that open for us a bit, the emotional impact of preaching and leading worship on this stuff, and being aware of how it affects us and who we are and how we're leading God's people is a really important factor to take into account. So I think you've done us all a service in saying a little bit about that and how that works in your life. Ruth, where were you going to go with these readings?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I started thinking, and it sounds a bit like your, I've really got to be careful, expository times. Because I was lucky enough to go to Jerusalem a couple of years ago and stand on the Mount of Olives and look at, and I'm not very good at, I'm all right with maps, but the photographs of this is this and this is that, I'd never quite conveyed the geography to me of standing on the Mount of Olives and then going down. We travelled down and down and down, and then up to the gate and into the city, and then up to where Golgotha may have been, outside the old city, the former walls, and the place of the garden. And this sort of, I'll try and do it the right way around, which is the wrong way around to me on the screen. So starting from the hill and going down and then up again and then up a bit more, feels to me like the kind of the emotional journey of Holy Week. And so I was sort of starting to think about how I would bring that together and help people be kind of more ready for the whole of Holy Week. I think I've done that quite often on Palm Sunday, said, let's not get carried away with the cheering here, because we need to be ready to do all this other stuff, this harder stuff. So in my mind, there was kind of the geography and the physical journey and the kind of mental journey we're going to take. And then I got absolutely caught up, stopped short by the bit that, because again, we don't always look at the John one, but that John says, all this happens, the great crowd, and they come in, and the palm branches, and the hosannas, and the donkey. His disciples did not understand these things at first. But when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So there's something really weird that having thought about the crowd, the disciples are kind of, what? Are they joining in with the palms? Are they? And presumably they're following the donkey, but they've got no idea what's going on. And I kind of feel that I want to say something of that to people about Holy Week, that our expectations could be completely overturned. The expectations of the crowd certainly were. They expected maybe King, Messiah, saving, here's the one who's going to overthrow the Romans, whatever. the disciples were expecting, well, I don't know, but they weren't expecting what they got. And can we somehow journey into Holy Week, not thinking that we've got to do this and then we've got to do that, and we've got tick off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday prayers, maybe Monday, Thursday, Good Friday. But I think for me this year, I'm being challenged to lead others in worship, and challenged most of all for myself to say, can I travel into Holy Week like the disciples, ready to say, I don't really understand, and that this will only make sense in retrospect, that the true perspective will only come when I get to Easter Sunday and I may be exhausted and I may be struggling to find the joy that I need. But then I might be able to look back and make sense of it. And I think this year, maybe God wants me to make some journey in my heart where I can't see this is where I'm going to be going. But I've got to step out and follow this strange man on a donkey and see where I end up. So that for me, I wasn't expecting to get there at all, but that's where at least I'm starting from.
Yeah, listen.
I don't know. So my question is, when does John count Jesus as being glorified? Because I'm just thinking that I just love all of that what Ruth said, and I thought, but even on Easter Sunday, they don't really get it, do they? So is it a bit, just post resurrection, but not on the first day when they've had time to get used to the idea? Is it Ascension? Is it Pentecost? But Pentecost isn't really about Jesus so much. So I just wondered when the point that they get it actually is. I say I don't know the answer. That's just something I'm wondering.
Well, and sorry, I haven't got time to flick back quickly, but there's the bit, isn't there, of the voice comes from heaven and says, I have glorified you and I will glorify you again, or words to that effect. Somebody else will be quicker than I am with getting the exact verse.
That bit's to come, which is actually in the reading that we had for the previous Sunday, which comes just after this.
Oh,
so
you see, the lectionary's got us hopping about. That
so it's in verse 28 of this same chapter.
Okay, yeah. So there's something, yeah. That's I love that question. I wouldn't ask a congregation because I don't know what the answer is myself. Or maybe other people might have a better idea.
Yeah.
May of course be that there's not just one moment in which Jesus was glorified.
Yep. And again, are the disciples pointing us towards Jesus is always glorified? I mean, if you think of John and the prologue and the Logos, maybe Jesus was never not glorified, if you see what I mean. But we see it at different times. But that's
making it sound like a John Lewis advertising slogan. Never not knowingly glorified.
Jesus, never not.
Rachel, you were going to add something.
Just picking up on what Ruth was saying about expectations, because one of the things I'd written down was what's Jesus doing that we're not expecting, as a sort of general question to myself. But because what Lithan pointed out about Jesus just finding a young donkey really jumped out at me, and also that I read it several times, and you don't kind of have any talk of a procession in these verses. Jesus finds a donkey and sits on it. So then I was thinking, well, you could have just there happened to be a crowd, and Jesus, just sits there on the donkey for a little while, because it doesn't really talk about the procession. It doesn't talk about them walking on anywhere. The people go out to meet Jesus, but it doesn't say Jesus goes in. So there was just a whole lot of stuff going on in my mind. How much of this story have I invented? Or, do I just, like you said, Phil, Easter becomes like Christmas. It becomes a collage of all the Gospels kind of chucked together somehow. So I liked, what you were saying about expectations, Ruth. It really struck me in the similar way.
Yeah, it is a collage, isn't it? And it's, I suspect it's futile to try and get away with that, and try and say, oh, we're just doing John this year. So forget everything else that anyone's ever said about Palm Sunday. This is what we want you to think about, because as soon as they hear it, they'll be in their childhoods remembering waving palms and throwing cloaks. So yeah, you can't get away from that collage idea. But I do think it is worth just pausing to think about the completeness of what John's trying to say here. Yeah, Ruth.
Well, just as you use the word collage, what's great about a collage is to look at the picture, but then also to appreciate, oh, look, in this bit, that's how they've done that bit. So maybe that's what we're offering people. We're not saying don't look at the whole picture of Palm Sunday, but I'm very struck by Rachel saying, yeah, the crowd went out to meet Jesus. Jesus sat on a donkey. Go home. That I wouldn't do that to a congregation, I don't think. But to say to them, let's just focus for a moment. Let's just zoom in on this bit, and to use the Gospels to say that's what this bit of the collage is done by this Gospel writer in that way. And yes, to link it to. I mean, I'm glancing in my diary, in my Bible now, reading on. We've got the Greeks who wish to see Jesus, and we've got Jesus speaking about his death, and then we've got this whole washing the feet. There's loads more to come in John, so he doesn't want us to rush from triumphal entry to Good Friday or even to Maundy Thursday. There's a load of pausing and stopping, and I think the idea of focusing on bits of the collage really appeals to me.
It's in John's Gospel, the way I hadn't noticed that, so thanks for drawing that to our attention, Rachel. It's not a procession, it's a photo opportunity, isn't it? It's almost like Jesus is saying, there's this bit from Zechariah that says there's going to be a donkey, so I'll go and sit on one for a bit so the crowds can see me do it. And it changes it a bit in my head, what John's trying to do here, with the symbolism of it and what's happening. The other thing that bothers me about crowds and the way we deal with Palm Sunday is, and I've done this, and I'm sure probably you all have as well, that we talk about the crowds on Palm Sunday, and we equate that with the crowds calling for Jesus to be crucified, and we say they were the same crowd. And for the last few years, I've been thinking, why are we saying it was the same crowd? Because they say people are hypocritical, aren't they? And how fickle we are. But it doesn't have to have been the same crowds at all that were calling for his crucifixion and that were assembling at the gate. It might have been a group of poor people longing for salvation at the gate, and it might have been a group of more powerful people with vested interests gathered to call for his crucifixion. It's always kind of jarred a bit with me when we make those easy assumptions about crowd, what was happening on this procession and what was going on. And so I've kind of vowed in my own prayers to be a little bit more careful about that, I think, to not to make those kind of assumptions about the story which aren't in there. It doesn't say this was the same crowd anywhere. But well, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but we don't know. It's our own. We add stuff to the story, which I suppose is good. And I kind of there's a little bit in my head that's set off ticking in the background that I'm trying to ignore, about Ruth confusing the Bible with her diary. And there's a bit of my head trying to work out whether that's actually quite a nice thing. So the Bible is my diary. It determines what I do day to day. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch. There you are. I'm trying to rescue you from that one, Ruth. The Bible is my diary, and I said it on purpose because I mean this. So there. Okay, we've got lots of conflicting stuff in our minds about Palm Sunday and how we do this. I'm now guessing that nobody's going to suggest that we get people lined up throwing cloaks and waving palms, given some of the things that we've said already, and given the situation with lockdown that we will still be in. on Palm Sunday. So, Lithan, we've bigged you up a bit now about giving us all the answers to this with your exposition of the glory of Passion Sunday over Palm Sunday. What else have you got in mind for worship this coming week?
If I was in a building for Palm Sunday, I would still call it Palm Sunday, but we wouldn't just stop at Palm Sunday. So we would do a bit of a procession with cloaks and palm branches and whatever, and giving out palm crosses. Because I think I've said before how it always strikes me going around to visit people, how many still have their palm cross up all year round. And I think just that renewal and having something to look at that's both Palm Sunday and Good Friday is quite important. So quite often I do we act out the story from Palm Sunday to Good Friday in church on Palm Sunday. And part of that is some people will engage, some will come to things Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Some will come Thursday, Friday, some just come Sunday and Sunday. And there's such a danger that you just go from Hosanna, forgetting the Saviour's thing, yay, it's Jesus, to yay, he's risen again, without really doing the journey in between. And so it depends what church I'm in as to how much physical walking we do, but if possible, we walk around. So different parts of the building will have names on, so, the upper room and the temple, and we will be a noisy temple, and I might get someone to act out being Jesus and turn a table over. And kind of at each stage, at each station, there's a time of reflection and prayer and bits of different hymns to kind of intersperse. And we do get to, the bit I always love doing, which now Phil has ruined completely, is when we're at the pavement, so when we're the crowd, I hold up little signs that say, kill him, crucify him. And then I remind people that they've just been the ones shouting for Jesus' death. And it is quite it might not be in the same crowd, but it is quite a profound moment of saying, we cannot stand aside from what happened in some senses. And then we go to the, so we've done the garden, lots of different bits, and we end with Jesus going to the cross. So we're kind of getting ready for Good Friday. But if you don't do Good Friday, you'll have done enough then to go on the next day. So that's my visual one. I'll let Ruth speak and then I'll come up and say the other idea.
Sorry, it was just, I love the idea of getting people to journey, to do it, to make the journey. And I don't think that's then saying it's the same crowd. And I like your sense of, you have said crucify him, because that takes us out of the whole anti-Semitic, bad Jewish people crucified Jesus, and gets us to a point of, do you really think you would have been any different? There's a Roman soldier standing there with a spear, and someone says, so, whose side are you on? The man with the pointy stick. That I'm gonna just play it safe, and I, Jesus got himself into this mess and presumably is going to get himself out of it, and I think that sense of our identification of this was just people like us. Yeah, thank you.
I certainly wouldn't want to ruin that, Lithan. And I think there is something very powerful. If you're going to ask a congregation, which we often do, to shout Hosanna, Hosanna, we also ought to ask them to shout crucify, crucify. If we're going to get them to identify with that part of the story, we should get them to identify with the whole of the story, with their voices, rather than just say we're the goodies in this. I think that's, absolutely with you there. Rachel.
Leading on from that, I was thinking that I'd try to lead some kind of reflective time where the questions and the space for people to think about this, but questions are asked about where do we exalt Jesus in our daily living, where it is, you know, Jesus at the center of our attention, and we're doing all the, you know, waving and marveling at how wonderful he is, and where are those times when we're working against him, and shouting crucify. And actually I'd add, even based on the thing that Ruth said about Hosanna, that struck me, where do we need to shout save us? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, you sounded like you were moving on to some more ideas, Lithin.
Yeah, so this year I don't think we're going to be able to do that. So I've written reflections in the past. I might consult with Phil and join some of them together. So we've got quite a few different reflections that we can then ask different people to record and share together, so that you have different voices being the voices from the journey through from Palm Sunday to Good Friday. And oh yes, let's see if I can share screen. That's so.
Talk yourself through it.
I know, I do have to, because the share screen thing comes. So this person called Liz Crumlish in actually March 2008, but I used it in a sermon once, did a meditation for Palm Sunday that I think is really, really good. Her blog is called Journaling, but I found if you put Liz, and I think it's with an S, so that makes it easier. Oh no, it's with a Z, but Crumlish is a useful surname like Nevard to spot someone. So, but you need to go back to March 2008 in her blog, wrote a really good reflection. And again, it's what I like about the end of it is being the people on at the pavement are saying we would be against the crowd going, no, save Jesus, wouldn't we? Well, maybe we'd have calmed our jets a bit. There's no point in all of us coming to a sad end. We could have at least whispered, leave him alone, or to be on the safe side, we would have kept quiet. And I just love that, you know, what would we really have done? Because we like to think, a bit like Phil was saying, we like to think that we'd still be going, save us, yes, he's the one, but would we actually be the ones? Even if we'd say, well, I'd never say crucify him, would we actually be able to stand up against what's going on? And I love the bit then she goes, don't we make you proud? It really does stick with me. And then for a song, because I've heard we once, the screen sharing thing just gets in the way, doesn't it? There we go. The psalm that none of us have talked about starts with, give thanks to the Lord for he is good, his love endures forever. And Chris Tomlin's written a worship song that basically that's what it is. And it's, again, one to start Palm Sunday, although I expect if we did that, lots of congregations would go, why haven't we sung this, and this? It is one of the Sundays where if you deviate from the regular hymns and tunes, you can be in trouble. But it's a song of praise. It's quite long, actually, 5 minutes 25. It's quite a lot of time because it's a worship song. So the idea is that you repeat the lines and you kind of are drawn into being lost in wonder, love and praise. But it's a really good one. So if we wanted to have some of the psalm coming in, then that would be a way to do it.
Okay, thank you. I thought you were about to play it. That's why I paused.
No, I decided I wouldn't.
People can look it up for themselves. Marvelous. Rachel, where were you going with this week?
Well, I've already said about the kind of reflection, getting people to think about where we want to, where we exalt Jesus, where we are turning against him, and where we want to cry out for him to save us. And I feel that I'm going to mention COVID now, that that's there's a lot of all of those things in where people are, isn't there? That 1 minute we're really high because all the vaccines coming out and this, that and the other, and then but we're really low because there's a record number of people who've died again today or whatever, and then somewhere in the middle is this sort of sense of save us, Lord. So yeah, I feel that that whole kind of range of emotions is quite topical, if you like. I was looking at hymns, and I was quite disappointed in some ways that it's hard to find anything much other than the sort of traditional ones. And there's only a couple of those that I can really stomach singing. And one of them is Ride On in Majesty, purely because you get the verse where it says, in lowly pomp, ride on to die. And I feel that you've got that sort of realism of this coming thing to bear in mind. And also, My Song is Love Unknown is another one where you've got, in one verse, you've got the first half of the verse, which is the crowds praising and shouting Hosanna, and the second half, then crucify is all their breath. So I would probably go to those. There was one other hymn that wasn't specifically so much Palm Sunday focused, but it's called Come Wounded Healer. It's in Singing the Faith. Of course, it's by Martin Leckybush. Never quite sure how to pronounce his surname. But in verse 2, he says, come hated lover and gather us near. You're welcome, you're teaching, you're challenged to hear. Where scorn and abuse cause rejection and pain, your loving acceptance makes hope live again. So I would probably be able to draw that into Palm Sunday, in that we've got the rejection to come. But I like he contrasts quite well the wounded healer, the hated lover, broken victor is the third verse. So I'd probably be tempted to use him, but otherwise I did find it quite difficult, the finding of songs for today.
Thank you. That's a slightly more depth in that hated lover imagery, and some of the options that are around. I always remember Carolyn Brock, who was involved in the editorial committee of Rejoice and Sing, at any opportunity railing against the inclusion of "We have a king who rides a donkey." We have a king and his name is Jesus. Hooray, and up she rises, or something like that, as the chorus doesn't
King
go.
is risen.
Jesus the King is risen. I don't know why they didn't stick with hooray and up he rises like the original. That would have done. So yeah, I wonder if the paucity of new stuff available is just because people think it'll be drowned out by the traditional, just like people are reluctant to write new carols for Christmas Day or for Christmas, because they know that other stuff will be written. Although we don't get the same Easter hymn competitions that we do, like Radio 4 run one, don't they? Always there's a new carol that's unveiled at Christmas as a competition for writing a new carol. So maybe there's mileage there for budding hymn writers to bring us something that involves those tensions that the two hymns that you mentioned certainly do have quite powerfully. Ruth, where are you going with imagery and creativity and worship this week?
I was still on the sort of overturning expectations and trying to. I think I wanted to find something that would unsettle me a bit, or still more, about Palm Sunday. And I remembered the first time that I think I saw the film of Jesus Christ Superstar in school. So it wasn't the best way probably of seeing it, but I remember being struck by the Hosanna, Hosanna song, because at first it sounds like a, kind of, everybody join in, lovely, happy. And then you realise that Andrew Lloyd Webber with the music, and I'm not a great fan, but he actually, I think this is one of his better bits of work, because he has that bit where the brass do that bit. It's kind of a clash. So he's recognising that even in the, everything's great, there's still that, whoa, it's all going to go horribly wrong. So he's got something of the tension in the music. And Tim Rice with the words, it's actually, I think it's brilliant in that it draws you into the questions asked of Jesus in the lyrics. So it definitely takes on a dark turn. And so I was looking for a version to share with you, and I do love the version with Tim Minchin as Judas Iscariot, because I think he's brilliant. But then I found this version, and I've got to do the whole sharing screen bit, where it's from, well, it'll say on the screen where it's from, so as long as I get it right and remember to share the sound and find the right bit. Oh, hang on, I've got to open it. No, it's not offering it to me.
Ooh, the tension. The tension is building.
You've gone on mute, Ruth.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let's try. Good, you probably didn't hear me burbling. So it says it's from Paramount Theatre in 2017, only 36 seconds, which I'll play. And Jesus is black, which I thought, about time too, because what I found difficult about some of the other versions, thinking about the first version I saw, where the whole cast was white, then you get to versions where, oh, well, no, that's not true, Judas was black. Yeah. Then you get to versions where sometimes you find the high priest with the really deep, gravelly voice might be played by somebody who's black, and you think, ouch. So finding somewhere where Jesus is black, again, it just kind of overturns those expectations. It just, maybe it would be unsettling for a congregation, but maybe Palm Sunday is a day to be unsettled.
Yeah, I think you've all made me think about this whole crowd thing and waving of palms, and watching that made me think again. And I'm not sure where I've got to now in thinking this through, because I don't know. Some people have been watching the new series on Netflix about the outbreak of AIDS, how that impacted a particular community that are portrayed in the series. What's it called again, Ruth?
It's a sin. It's a sin, but it's Channel 4. Channel 4.
It's not Netflix. It's Channel 4. Netflix. It's a sin, and a lot of people I've spoken to saying, episode 1 is just full of joy and aren't these times great that the world is opening up, and yet in the back of your head you know what's going to happen, and it's all the more powerful for that. I think that was deliberate, to show it with such a joyful scenes of the world opening up for these people. And I wonder if the same is true about Palm Sunday. I remember seeing something about Bloody Sunday, and I remember seeing some documentary footage of how that procession started out, and people were, they had children, they had no idea what was going to happen, and somehow to see the footage at the beginning, and people had these high hopes of what this demonstration was going to be, made it all the more powerful, knowing what was going to happen. And I wonder if that's can also be the case with Palm Sunday. We shouldn't shy away from saying, okay, they didn't know what was going to happen, and they were lost in this moment of maybe this was their time, and this was the Saviour who would answer their Hosanna. Yeah, Ruth.
Just wondered if it's too soon to make a parallel with the Capitol and Trump and, wow. I don't know. I almost daren't think it, let alone say it. But the idea that, that was about whatever it was about, supporting Trump, and then there was this kind of, so let's go down and show them what we think, that led to 5 or 6 people dying, which, it's trying to think your way through what happens with crowds, what happens with conflict, what happens with protest, and remembering that all of that was happening because Jerusalem, then as now, was a powder keg.
Absolute powder keg, looking for a Messiah under every rock. I think, as I once read, somebody wrote they were looking for a Messiah under every rock. And it wasn't the first time that a would-be Messiah had marched into Jerusalem. They knew what could happen, and what might happen. I went down a track I wasn't expecting. I'm going to do the same thing again. We're all doing it now. I just share my screen. I'll talk you through the whole process of sharing my screen. A track that I kind of wasn't expecting to go down, because it was something I was aware of but had never connected to Palm Sunday, and that is 1968. There was a mule train in America that journeyed to Washington, inspired, I think, by Martin Luther King, who wasn't alive to see it arrive in Washington. But is partly his inspiration, and obviously the association with the mule. And with particularly, I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of this. This was a photograph report, documentary reporter who made his career out of starting with this event and his recollections of this event. And I'm going to play up to the point. So I'm going to play a couple of minutes up to the point where he describes the crowds responding to this mule train and what it was about. So here you go.
I was trying to understand what was going on in America. I couldn't understand why all these people were being killed and what forces in the country was creating this and why. You're young, so you think this is supposed to be a democracy.
Roland Freeman found his calling the spring of 1968. Drawn to the ideals of the civil rights movement, he came to Marks, Mississippi to document the journey of the mule train. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. envisioned the mule train as part of a national poor people's campaign. But King died before it started. The caravan moved through the South to join some 50,000 protesters in the nation's capital. The mule train was Freeman's very first project, the first in a long career devoted to documentary photography.
This was the first undertaking of its type that I ever ventured to try. And I basically thought I knew what I was doing, but I really didn't. I had a little tape recorder with me. I had 2 cameras that weren't the greatest. I was watching what was going on and taking pictures here and there. I had never been to school for photography. It was all a matter of feel, you see. And some days, were better than others. But it seemed like I was constantly moved by the spirit of the people. Going down the highway never ceased to amaze me when you see people's reaction to the mule train, folks that didn't have hardly nothing sharing everything they had with you. I mean, y'all come on in. I'm cooking some cornbread. I'm making a pot of beans. They gave you what they had from the heart. They wish you well from the heart. Black folk, they understood. People brought their children out. They were holding up their babies. They wanted you to see what was happening. Folks understood. Nobody thought it was a joke.
Okay, I'm going to leave all of that on. It plays on for about 5 or 6 minutes, and you can find that on YouTube if you type in mule train and videos. It's just very moving. The tears he has in his eyes, he describes how that train is greeted, not always with open arms, as you can imagine, along the way into Washington. And if you look on Google Images, you can find tons of his photographs, absolutely sort of really moving and powerful photographs of what was happening there. It said that Martin Luther King kicked off this campaign as he went to a town and he was talking about the experience of poor people, and a teacher described how, while he was there, they had an apple and they cut the apple into 8 pieces, and each of the children had 1 piece each. And he said, people need to come and see this. He invited the politicians to come and see it. They came and nothing happened. So he said, well, the only way we can do this is for the poor people to go to Washington, which is how the mule train idea was born. So that's got obvious parallels. There's several directions you could go with that. It's a really, really powerful story to tell, with some of the pictures that he's done. There's tons of these pictures, I think, that you could create something quite powerful from if you wanted to. The other thing that I thought I might do, although I think that's probably the direction I'll go in, is to look at the Psalm. My version of this Psalm talks about God's steadfast love enduring forever. The phrase they have, some have kindness, but I prefer the translation steadfast love. And just for larks, I looked up a thesaurus for other words for steadfast. What does God's steadfast love mean? And the red ones are ones that are the best matches, and the yellow ones are sort of partial matches. I wonder what it would mean for people to go through and just reread that phrase and insert, instead of steadfast, some of those words and describe God's abiding love, God's adamant love, God's stubborn love, God's unflinching, we already used that word, God's unflinching love, God's unswerving, unwavering, unyielding, intense, relentless. And I think that would be just a really powerful way of bringing out what it is the psalmist is trying to get at. Stubborn, God's stubborn love, or God's rigid love. Maybe it doesn't sound quite as warm as we might want it to sound sometime. Unbending, unfaltering, unquestioning, wholehearted. So I thought there was mileage in that. And because there's mileage in that, there's possibly also mileage in the opposite that might describe our love. The opposites, or the antonyms for steadfast, I think the word is antonym, are afraid, false, pliable, unreliable. So you could craft something, or some prayer or some liturgy that talked about God's steadfast love and our wavering, yielding, weak, irresolute, disloyal love. So yeah, that's where I went. I would probably go with the mule train, and with the idea of processions and crowds and how they end up and where they go, and some of that. Maybe that also links in with the clip Ruth showed us from Jesus Christ Superstar, or was it Godspell? I always get those two mixed up. Jesus Christ Superstar, and having a black Jesus in there, and reaction that still gets from people. It's not everybody who maybe would see that would say, great, look, at last. I can imagine other reactions to that as the crowds gather to watch that video clip. There'll be a range of stuff going on. So it's as ever a rich theme as we embark upon Holy Week. Has anyone got any final thoughts to add? I think I wanted to say, and I hope this goes without saying, and something of what I think we've tried to share in this episode, is that this task of preaching opens up wells and taps and geysers and fountains in us that we don't always want to visit. Preaching these texts at this time in this week is tough. If it wasn't tough, we wouldn't be doing it right. And I think I'd want to invite preachers to take care. Take care of yourself. Look after yourselves this week. It's not all about giving Holy Week to your congregation. It has also to be about living Holy Week yourself, and looking after yourself as you try and take others on that journey. So we do want to leave you in prayer, because we recognize what a task this is and how deep this reaches into our lives. So I'm going to invite Ruth to lead us in prayer.
And in fact, I'm not, in that I'm going to use the prayer from the prayer handbook for Palm Sunday, which is written by another Rachel Pullman. And so I'll offer Rachel's prayer for all of us, and that's another resource we could all use. So let us pray. Gentle Christ, you set your face to Jerusalem, the place of trial, of torture and death, surrounded by noise, by expectation and hope, love unknown, vulnerability unrecognized. Gentle Christ, we will walk with you, we will weep with you, we will watch with you, our eyes on you, our hearts with you, our lives for you, in humility, in awe, in peace. Amen.